She's now bragging about the success of Snow White, which is a movie that's going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, and mainly because of her, and because nobody wanted to support her.
Hey everyone, welcome back! Today we're diving into the latest Snow White shocker. Fans are slamming both the movie and its star, Rachel Zegler, and now there's buzz that Disney might be pulling Snow White merchandise from stores. Is this backlash so intense that Disney is making drastic moves? And how is Rachel handling the heat? Stick around, because we've got all the details on this unfolding drama.
There are empty theaters all around the country. We are now at a 1 out of 10 on IMDb for the new Snow White. And
comments from those who have actually sat through the film highlight an apparent lack of consistency in nearly every department. Acting performances, writing, directing, producing, and cinematography all draw negative remarks from people expecting the high production values usually associated with such a big studio.
And as we saw last weekend with the first weekend for Snow White, Rachel Zegler was coping real hard. She, of course, was saying things like on Instagram, like, "Thank you so much for making this the #1 movie in the world, guys." And well, this time around with the second weekend, her approach is completely different, okay?
One person described the overall aesthetic of the movie as an unsettling fever dream, an observation that encapsulates the general confusion viewers report feeling. A lot of attention has fallen on Rachel Zegler, who plays the titular role in this adaptation. She made various statements about the production, defending its approach and objectives. However, attempts to portray the film as a forward-thinking reinterpretation appear to have clashed with the reaction from many fans and commentators, who see the final product as lacking cohesion and failing to capture the essence of the classic story.
Don't alienate half of the country when you're putting out a product meant to appeal to all. It's the Michael Jordan Republicans buy sneakers too.
An element of the controversy is that the love interest subplot, central to earlier renditions, was largely removed. Defenders of this decision argue it modernizes the character, while others view it as fundamentally altering the beloved narrative beyond recognition. Even individuals once branded as staunch Disney loyalists seem to be walking back their endorsements. These are critics or social media personalities who historically gave Disney projects the benefit of the doubt. That they have begun criticizing Snow White for its script, visual style, and tonal disarray indicates a deeper shift.
One of the 18 hours I am in the Snow White dress, I expect to get paid. If it's 18 hours, I want 18 hours of pay. I'm sure she got under.
Some in the audience simply feel that the film's underperformance stems from the content itself, an apparently disjointed storyline, and multiple reshoots that may have left it riddled with inconsistencies. The repeated use of reshoots is cited as a leading cause of the picture's fractured nature. There were reportedly 3 separate rounds of them, each presumably designed to fix script problems or improve certain sequences. But repeated tinkering might have backfired. Observers say the final result feels incomplete and patched together, with abrupt cuts and awkward transitions that break the movie's rhythm. Instead of a seamless narrative, the audience gets what some call a hodgepodge of scenes that never blend into a coherent storyline.
People have real problems and no one gives a shit if she got paid for 17 instead of 18 on her multi-million-dollar salary, which is not calculated by the hour.
As for the budget, it ballooned to the point that recouping costs would have demanded a massive turnout over multiple weekends. Yet the wave of negative press in advance, driven by leaks about potential storyline changes and glimpses of the production's visual approach, dampened enthusiasm. Long before the release, some fans had started voicing apprehension, fearing that something was off about this adaptation. Their concerns centered around the possibility of major departures from Snow White's original themes, worrying that the story's classic charm would be overridden by modern additions that felt forced.
So she just encapsulates everything that most of us cannot stand about modern-day feminism and the left in general, and Hollywood.
Meanwhile, Rachel Zegler maintains that the film was intended as an instructive work aimed at empowering younger viewers by removing the dependency on a romantic partner. She has described the criticisms as stemming from what she labels a particular demographic she believes is resistant to progress. However, people who disliked the movie often stress that their objections are grounded primarily in the film's perceived low quality, including flawed structure, shallow character arcs, and scenes that feel entirely out of place in the Snow White universe. Others point out that even major supporters of contemporary spins on old fairy tales can become frustrated when the final product seems half-baked. The film's conclusion, for instance, apparently features a festive scene in which characters are wearing matching white outfits and performing a dance that many regard as bizarrely off-tone. Such moments, according to various accounts, do not harmonize with the tone of the original narrative, nor with any natural character progression. Rather, they pop up uncomfortably, leaving viewers scratching their heads.
Her heroine cannot be in love or be saved by a man, the prince, that she's more focused on becoming the leader she was meant to be, as if women in modern-day America must make that choice.
Executives at Disney appear to have recognized the extent of the problem partway through the promotional phase. As reviews and early box office data began to paint a bleak picture, the marketing campaign was reportedly scaled down, likely to avoid throwing good money after bad. The merchandise connected to the film also experienced a downturn, with some lines supposedly discontinued or never fully rolled out. The heavy financial toll is all the more surprising because Disney's live-action updates typically manage, at the very least, passable returns at the global box office. Snow White, however, seems poised to set an unwanted record as perhaps the biggest flop in that category.
Be a leader as a female and fall in love and be rescued by a prince, like that's incongruous bullshit. That's only the left's version of what it means to be a strong woman or female empowerment.
Public remarks from Bob Iger have not helped matters. Critics assert that the top leadership might be trying to spin the situation, dismissing negative coverage as merely the rumblings of overly harsh reviewers. But industry insiders point out that the film's budget and revenues are matters of public record, leaving little room for rhetorical maneuvers. It is one thing to call the movie an artistic triumph or an important cultural statement. It is another to convince investors that the deficits can be overlooked.
So, I mean, this woman has clicked every box. And just for cherry on top at the end, she gave an interview last week talking about how they were basically a bunch of white supremacists on the set of West Side Story.
When a production costs this much, numbers are difficult to ignore. Among fans of Disney's classic version, displeasure is pronounced. They recall the charm and heart of the original story and feel that these were overshadowed by a desire to push contemporary messaging in ways that did not mesh with the underlying fairy tale structure. While updates to traditional stories can be welcomed if handled thoughtfully, it seems that the approach chosen for this version of Snow White crossed lines that many viewers found unappealing.
That's her thanks to Steven Spielberg, who discovered her and made her. So she's an ingrate, she's annoying, and I think she's probably two and done.
Layered on top of that, the rumored continuity errors and incongruous final scene contribute to the impression of a film that lost its direction somewhere along the way. People discussing the fiasco often note that not every revision or modernization attempt has to be detrimental. Some well-received live-action adaptations have introduced changes that felt organic while still honoring the source. But in this case, supporters of the classic appear to believe that the essence of Snow White was sacrificed for motives that come across as more ideological than creative. The attempt to produce a movie that fans would embrace while also infusing a new message might have been noble in concept, but the technical execution, narrative construction, and final editing decisions undermined that potential.
And if she hadn't have opened her mouth, I think that this movie might have done well. They might have just been able to ride on the hopium of the movie and some well-cut trailers, and people would have paid to go see it. And then it would have fallen off when people knew it was garbage.
With well over $250 million reportedly spent just on principal photography and post-production elements, plus tens of millions more allocated for reshoots, marketing, and merchandise tie-ins, the film would have needed a juggernaut-level performance worldwide to break even. Analysts quickly concluded that the initial weekend take and subsequent receipts did not come close to offsetting those extensive costs. This shortfall means that Snow White 2025 might eclipse any prior adaptation's losses, potentially marking a low point in Disney's record of big-budget reimaginings.
But Rachel Zegler made it so hateable that you really sabotaged and took hundreds of millions of dollars from the studio. I don't know how anyone would ever want to go into business with her ever.
Some watchers of the industry see this as a cautionary tale. In their view, big studios should be more measured when they funnel hundreds of millions of dollars into a single movie. The assumption used to be that a recognized brand name or classic tale guaranteed a built-in fan base, but that may no longer be a safe bet. especially when viewers believe the underlying material is being changed or mishandled. Nostalgia can be powerful, yet it can also turn to frustration when alterations appear to disregard the aspects that made a story beloved in the first place. Amid the turmoil, multiple individuals involved with the film have tried to defend it as a bold step forward. They describe the negative reception as being driven by certain audiences opposed to progressive creative directions.
25,000 more just like her knocking on the same doors that she had opened to her. She had the opportunity of a lifetime, and instead of being humble and grateful, she was entitled and a snot.
However, the widespread consensus from standard moviegoers is that the film faltered because it simply was not strong on a basic storytelling level. Scenes had disjointed transitions, characters seemed incomplete or reworked too hastily, and a mood of confusion hung over the entire project. These realities are difficult to explain away just by pointing to viewer prejudice or misunderstanding. Meanwhile, some of the film's harshest detractors insist that the narrative's core identity was effectively abandoned. They object to the total removal of Snow White's classic romantic journey, replaced by an updated perspective that, to them, felt tacked on. In principle, they might be open to such a change if the adaptation used it to build a compelling story arc. Instead, they claim it was muddled, unclear, and overshadowed by oddly placed dancing scenes that disrupted the overall tone.
Do you know, how hard it is to find an attractive young woman in Hollywood who can act and sin? It's not hard. Who just isn't going to offend half the country.
In the midst of everything, Gallardo, referenced in discussions surrounding this production, has been linked to broader controversy, although those details are not the main subject here. The real spotlight remains on Rachel Zegler, who took up the lead role and has been outspoken in her defense of the final product. Her statements, circulated on social media, accuse certain sectors of the audience of refusing to acknowledge what she calls the realities of societal progress. This approach to criticism, however, appears not to have lessened the outpouring of negative or disappointed reactions to the film. Many are left wondering why the creative leads did not see these pitfalls. Perhaps they believed that high production values, known brand recognition, and a star-laden cast would be enough to ensure commercial success.
And I will look forward to her not getting cast in any more movies for a long time until she actually does learn something about humanity and humility.
Or maybe they felt that the cultural significance of a bold reimagining would outweigh any blowback. Whatever the thinking was, the end result is that Disney is dealing with a massive financial loss and an onslaught of unfavorable commentary. Their strategy of scaling back promotional efforts after the fact might reflect an attempt to cut losses and distance themselves from an increasingly awkward situation. The scenario underscores how a studio's approach to a beloved property can backfire if the adaptation fails to resonate with core audiences. Fans who grew up admiring the original are sometimes the harshest critics when they sense the spirit of that older story is being diluted or distorted. Rather than paying homage to the timeless simplicity that made Snow White a cultural touchstone, this remake apparently tries to use it as a platform for new themes in ways that viewers perceive as clumsy or disingenuous.
Where Steven Spielberg and co. were demanding that she prove how Latina she really is, since her name doesn't sound Latina, and she was angrily saying, did I have to bring in my little abuelita for you to believe that I was Latina?
Even mainstream media outlets that typically go easy on major studios have published lukewarm or negative remarks. The repeated mention of the astronomical costs only deepens the embarrassment for those in charge. Bob Iger, whose leadership is being questioned, faces pressure from shareholders and board members to find some path forward. The fear is that more attempts at reimagining animated classics could suffer the same fate, if not meticulously planned. Corporate logic previously held that these adaptations were safe investments due to built-in recognition, but the market may be evolving. At a deeper level, the fiasco highlights the danger of ignoring core creative principles in favor of what some view as perfunctory changes meant to update a narrative. Even supportive audiences who welcome fresh interpretations can become alienated if those adaptations undermine story coherence.
But more importantly, here's a video that Rachel Zegler posted inside of the theater. Who does she hang out with? So one, she's cheering for herself. And then she's laughing like a retarded donkey hyena hybrid. and she's squealing and clapping for herself in an empty theater.
The feeling expressed by many is that if the story itself is poor, no amount of money or pre-release hype can salvage it. Snow White, 2025, appears to epitomize that danger, given how swiftly it went from potential blockbuster to notorious flop. Some longtime observers recall that past Disney live-action versions, though not all unanimously praised, at least drew enough attention and funds to be considered moderately successful. This one seems different. The negative momentum began well before release and intensified once people saw the film or read early critical breakdowns of its content. Thus, attempts to retroactively portray it as the #1 movie in the world, a phrase reportedly used in some damage control efforts, feel hollow when actual figures and the avalanche of public feedback say otherwise.
A few lessons for Disney. Number one, stop cannibalizing all your old IP. Like, it's really bad. It's really bad business. Number two, please stop changing all of the historic plots, which actually have meaning to generations of people, to instead become generic woke story about how woman leads revolutionary uprising and she don't need no man.
Adding to the confusion, the final act apparently includes a party sequence in which every character dresses in white, culminating in a dance that many have called disorienting. Critics say such a scene is jarringly out of place. When combined with the absence of any traditional romance, the adaptation's last portion distances itself so far from classic conventions that it leaves some moviegoers baffled. Instead of ending on a note that might unify the new story's ideals with the original's charm, it has triggered widespread recoil, reinforcing the view that the filmmakers lost their grip on how to balance modernization with faithful storytelling.
1.9 out of 10 on IMDb, and those, by the way, they weren't dwarves. They were called bandits. So the Snow White doesn't, like, the amount of, like, if it ain't broken, don't fix
Break it.
Leave it the alone. Yeah, that's it. If it ain't broke, break it. Like, leave these stories alone. By the way, if she never opened her mouth and she didn't do all this nonsense, people would have gone and watched the movie. They would have made their money, but then people would have been disappointed after the math.
From a purely financial standpoint, the question is how the company might recover from the shortfall. Merchandising possibilities appear to have hit a wall. The once anticipated synergy between film release and product sales did not materialize. Insiders suggest that certain items associated with the production are being quietly shelved or sold off at reduced prices. The presence of unsold goods merely amplifies the sense that the film did not connect with its intended audience. The aftershocks extend to the enterprise's broader schedule, potentially delaying or reducing budgets for other projects that might have filled the gap under different circumstances.
Yeah, this thing is officially dead. It's dead. Snow White only made $3.7 million on Friday, coming in a distant third behind Working Man and a re-release of Chosen the Last Supper. Rachel Zegler destroyed a $1 billion franchise. This is the face of a franchise destroyer.
These developments also touch on a long-standing debate about the influence of social commentary in major studio films. The creative team presumably believed that focusing on new angles would inject relevance. But a segment of viewers, including fans who typically embrace progressive stories, report feeling that this version forced themes into the narrative in a manner that overlooked basic storytelling fundamentals. That mismatch between intent and execution has fueled heated discourse.
It's the thing that really shocks me about this story. You know, Disney and all these media companies, they invest hundreds of millions of dollars into these projects, right? Have they ever thought about maybe like a little bit of, like, I don't know, vulnerability study, opposition research, that sort of thing, before you go and hire some Zoomer who's a lunatic?
With many concluding that a more nuanced balance could have improved the outcome. Meanwhile, Rachel Zegler's frequent public remarks have made headlines. She emphasizes the importance of social messages, viewing the film as a vehicle to educate younger generations. From her standpoint, criticisms reflect a refusal to accept progressive ideas. Yet the ongoing wave of disappointed comments from general audiences often revolve more around confusion and frustration with the narrative's scattered quality than outright resistance to new directions.
So Rachel Zegler has now decided to turn off replies on Instagram following major backlash over the Snow White movie, because she is getting completely roasted in all of her comments on Instagram. Everyone is roasting her. Everyone is calling her out for her being one of the key players for why this movie is failing as badly as it is.
The disconnect between her viewpoint and the broader reaction is emblematic of the tension swirling around Snow White. 2025. Ultimately, the film now seems destined to be viewed as one of the greatest financial missteps in the history of Disney's live-action efforts. Industry experts who track large-budget pictures indicate it may stand as a case study in how not to handle a remake of a beloved classic. The repeated rewrites and reshoots, the heavy marketing push, the expensive merchandise that never found a market, all contributed to a perfect storm of overspending. By the time it reached theaters, it was under so much scrutiny that even decent word of mouth might not have saved it.
I don't really care what happens with this movie. I really hope her career is pretty much over. I'd be thrilled to see that. I can't imagine. I mean, Christian, you tell me. But is she not seen as box office poison now because of all of her antics?
You know, it's kind of a mixed track record. She's still fairly young. Her West Side Story debut was not a hit, and that was a Spielberg movie, so that was kind of a surprise. But if you're a studio, if you're a director, if you're a casting director, you've got to think twice or three times before hiring her. Listen, she's talented, she's attractive, she's got skill, but there are a lot of actresses in Hollywood who bring all that to the table and are not going to absolutely sabotage your work. She was plucked out of obscurity by Steven Spielberg. All you say is thank you, Mr. Spielberg, and you keep saying that for the next 50 years.
In reality, the general consensus is that the movie is subpar and that no amount of damage control can change that. This cautionary episode likely guarantees that Disney will reevaluate how it approaches future live-action adaptations of animated favorites. Shareholders and dedicated fans alike will be expecting more caution, especially in how money is allocated and how drastically core narratives are changed. The blow to the company's reputation is not minor, as it exposes vulnerabilities in a model that banks on repurposing nostalgic properties without fully respecting why those properties were cherished in the first place. In the context of big-budget productions, recouping losses can sometimes happen through foreign markets, streaming deals, or long-tail revenue strategies. But the magnitude of the loss here is so large that partial recovery seems more probable than a full rebound. It does not help that the film's brand has been tarnished by negative commentary, making it harder to generate excitement around its extended release strategy.
And now she's trying to reinvent herself because there's been so much blowback, and you can only imagine the studio calls about this woman behind the scene, like, oh my God, we're $242 million in, and our lead actress hates our film, our actors, our storyline.
Many watchers of the industry see this situation as an inflection point, suggesting that the era of churning out lavish remakes with minimal regard for narrative authenticity may be drawing to a close. Discussion now centers on what the creative heads have learned, if anything, about striking a better balance between modernizing an iconic fairy tale and maintaining its timeless qualities. People inside and outside the film business recognize the potential for breathing new life into classics. It just has to be done with a deft hand. By the accounts of those who have seen Snow White 2025, the final cut does not achieve that delicate balance. Instead, it stumbles through half-formed concepts and heavy-handed messages, leaving behind an underwhelming experience for its audience.
That is totally uplifting and the right way to be woke, Link, when you actually cancel the roles for the marginalized population because just putting them on screen is somehow racist.
So I remember back in 2023 when this was going on and all the little people making videos saying, well, wait, there's so few roles for us in Hollywood. We're being passed over for this. You could have cast seven little
Peter
people.
Dinklage.
Exactly. They're like, Peter Dinklage, you're rich. We're not. We're trying to be extras, or, we're in Johnny Knoxville's Jackass if we're lucky. And so for them, they're like, you're not going to cast us to be inclusive and progressive.
Henceforth, future live-action reimaginings will likely face closer scrutiny at every phase, from the initial scripting to test screenings to final edits, lest they repeat the missteps that led to this fiasco. Some supporters still hold out hope that a revisionist cut or a subsequent release might repair the damage, but more seasoned analysts doubt any version could remedy the structural faults or rewrite the negative publicity that has already colored public perception. Once a film acquires a reputation for being messy and disappointing, changing that narrative is an uphill struggle.
But these guys at Disney, they're not that bright, they're not that smart, and we see that because they can't come up with any new IP. Why not write some new movies? You guys sit around, you have billions millions of dollars, they keep going back and rewriting the classic.
It now appears the conversation will linger, not just among film goers, but within Disney's own halls. The blame game could intensify among producers, directors, and top executives. Bob Iger's leadership is being heavily questioned, as critics assert that the scope of this failure suggests systemic issues in decision-making, where Snow White 2025 was meant to be a high point. A recognizable brand with mainstream appeal, it has instead become a glaring example of how even the biggest studios can fail if they lose sight of key creative principles or overreach in budgetary matters.
Behind the scenes, you guys know as well as I do that those executives like Spielberg are looking at that saying, Rachel Zegler can F right off.
Nevertheless, there remains a possibility that certain viewers will enjoy the film for its attempts at reinterpretation, focusing on Rachel Zegler's vision of a self-determining heroine and praising the effort to remove older story elements. A fraction of critics may see it as a bold experiment, even if it missed the mark for the general audience. Such a contingent, however, seems overshadowed by the vast numbers who find the adaptation unsatisfying. The film's trajectory so far is a classic cautionary tale, illustrating how quickly hype can melt away if the finished product does not align with fan or critic expectations. What emerges most strongly from all the discourse is that the once automatic success of a Disney live-action remake can no longer be taken for granted.
She was plucked out of obscurity by Steven Spielberg. All you say is thank you, Mr. Spielberg, and you keep saying that for the next 50 years.
People are looking for more than a brand name or star power. They want engaging stories that strike a harmonious blend between the nostalgia of the original and any new themes introduced. In the case of Snow White 2025, the recurring view is that the effort to inject modern ideas was overdone, chaotic, and at the expense of basic storytelling. This, combined with a jaw-dropping budget, underscores why it has struggled so conspicuously at the box office. Time will tell if there is any slight rebound in streaming or overseas markets. Regardless, the damage to Disney's reputation and the blow to its finances have already happened. The film's supporters may persist in highlighting its virtues, but the negative consensus seems to overshadow those sentiments. When a studio invests this heavily in a single production, the public tends to expect a movie that at least feels polished and consistent, which is evidently not what people have encountered. The final takeaway is that Snow White 2025 stands as a major disappointment both creatively and commercially, likely to be dissected in entertainment circles for years to come as an emblem of miscalculated strategy in modern filmmaking.